Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about 5th edition. And what I want to specifically talk about is the reality that the fail state on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is so high that I think the game has value even in its failed state, which is not the case with Dungeons & Dragons' main competitors, right? I think, by the way, I think without a doubt, Dungeons & Dragons' biggest competitor is not other tabletop role-playing games. It's video games. If you're going to engage with Dungeons & Dragons, there's a high probability that if you weren't playing Dungeons & Dragons, you'd be playing the video games. I definitely believe this is true because one of the things you'll see when you talk to Twitter, when you watch Twitter create there. By the way, almost all tabletop role playing game creators are on Twitter. Twitter is a magnet for smart, and there just aren't any tabletop role playing game designers who aren't smart. It's just it doesn't exist. It's a purple unicorn that doesn't exist. And so basically, when you are dealing with this, when you're dealing with Dungeons & Dragons, what is this time you're spending on it going to displace, right? And I think the reality is the fail state on Dungeons & Dragons is unrecognized and is absolutely shockingly high in value. So let's talk about it. Okay, so what is the fail state? All right, so first of all, I'm going to explain to you the fail state. I think the fail state hits a ton. It hits a lot of Dungeon Masters, okay? The Dungeons & Dragons fail state. By the way, I went through the Dungeons & Dragons fail state. So when you get into Dungeons & Dragons, generally the flow is you get linked up with a Dungeon Master. That Dungeon Master runs a game. You enjoy the game a lot or marginally, and even if you don't enjoy the game, you're like, oh wait, a different Dungeon Master might do a better job of running this than this Dungeon Master did. So I'm going to stay engaged. I want to see what other stories exist within this world, right? And so then you graduate to being a Dungeon Master. You run one or two little arcs, and then you're like, okay, I get it. I understand this, right? Now I'm going to fill a notebook filled with my world and all my precious non-player characters, which are all going to be cooler than the player characters, of course. And I'm just going to, wring out every trope from every fantasy movie I've ever seen and whatever television, television show I'm watching right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to plan a 5-year campaign. And what's really going to happen is we're going to play for 6 months. My friend's going to get angry with me. The whole game is going to go bust because somebody moved or somebody got in a fight. And then the reality is I'll have run 6 months worth of crap that was in my notebook. And the reality is the best part of the game, the big mystery solves, the epic levels of play are never touched, right? This is 1,000 Dungeon Master stories. And I think just a ton of Dungeon Masters get into this, and they get into it when they come in the game at 12. They get into it when they come in the game at 22. They get into it when they come in the game at 42, right? And this is another thing. I'm old enough now where I could tell you right now, you can have the answers, but you can't hand them to other people. Other people insist on learning through pain. It's the way of the world, okay? So the reality is there's a lot of fail state for Dungeons & Dragons. So like it's just like very real that, the fail state is going to be there for a lot of Dungeon Masters, okay? So let's say you're a Dungeon Master who has done this, right? You've written, you've filled a notebook and you've dragged players through 6 months of play, and then your game craps out. I can't tell you how common this is. It's a fail state, okay? What are you left with from the fail state? What you are left with is a pile of treasure that is invaluable, okay? First of all, in order to become a good Dungeon Master, you have to read those core books. So the first thing you get is intensified literacy, okay? It's saying you have to read 750 pages of content, and you better pay attention. Right? You better know the PHB inside and out. You better know the MM inside and out. And you better know the DMG inside and out, okay? And because the DMG, the PHB, and the MM are incredibly interesting and have been compelling enough to have 5 different editions sell millions of copies, literally, none of that's wrong, right? Over 47 years, you're going to be compelled through those 750 pages. And when you're done, you're never going to say this to yourself, but you're like, hey, I can, as a Dungeon Master, you read 1,000 pages of content by the time you're ready, right? And so reading a millennium of pages is nothing. You know you can do it, right? And you're reading content that is both crunchy and narrative. Nothing in the world is like this. And so then once you move past that, you have this intensified literacy, right? Books don't scare you at all. You're like, I've read books with numbers and narrative, right? Oh, your report just has numbers? I can handle that, right? And it doesn't matter if your report's 500 pages long. I've already read it 750 pages of content and absorbed it to the point where I can make it functional, right? And it just doesn't scare you. So you get this intensified confidence, right? Here's the other one, okay? By the way, this is a table game. None of this applies to your stupid streamed game. Nobody cares about streamed games, right? Like, they're whatever. They were necessary for the pandemic, yay. I'll be happy to see them gone, right? All right, so here we go. So at that point, so basically the next one is an intensified socialization, okay? So in order to run your game with 4 players, right, you had to navigate the gauntlet of inviting people to your table. You had to overcome your shyness, right? You also realized that when, the first time these people showed up, you had to realize, hey, the fun of every player at this table is my responsibility, right? The other thing is, if the players bickered and weren't going to get along, you realized I need these people to get along together and to be socially interacting in a way that's socially interactive and real, right? So you had to manage not only your own relationship with players, but the relationship of the players themselves, right? Now, you didn't want to make yourself more palatable to human beings. You didn't intend to be a referee between 2 players that fight over, maybe they have the same power, maybe they're both pursuing the same power more, or they were both involved with the same power more previously, or maybe maybe one has a higher wealth class than the other one, and that person isn't kind to the other one. And so you had to navigate these things, and frankly, you didn't want to do it, and you didn't care about it, right? But the reality is you did it not because you cared about these people, but because you cared about your game, and you desperately wanted to tell your one notebook-filled story to these 4 people, right? Because you knew that they were all going to fight a dragon 3 years from now, right? And the reality is you had to have this intensified socialization. You had to fix your own foibles, your own social foibles. You had to serve as a social referee between players, right? And you had to navigate all of this for not to become a better person, to have more intensified literacy, to have more intensified socialization. You didn't care about any of that, right? All you cared about was telling your precious story at the table. But the fail state on that game does more than, frankly, a lot of colleges will ever do for kids, right? For humans. It's incredible. The fail state on Dungeons & Dragons is outrageously high, okay? Here's the next one. Here's the next fail state issue, right? Confidence. Once you've done this, right, and you're up and running, and you're 4 or 5 months in, you're like, holy cows. I'm creating my own world, right? And I have a tavern, and I know what drinks the tavern owner serves. I know the bards that come into that tavern, right? And then 20 miles up the road, there's an encampment, and in that encampment, there's a fisherman, right? And I know every detail of that fisherman and his family. And then 10 miles up the road, there's a tower, and that's a wizard's tower, and I know all the spells that wizard has, right? I know the books that are on his shelf, right? And then 20 miles up the road from that, there's a castle. And in that castle, there are courtroom politics that I understand to high degree. I am a world maker, right? And then also a week later, the castle, right, is attacked by a dragon, torn apart, half the non-player character, and you are, that week, you're in your books, right? And you know what you're doing? You are writing down, right? You're writing down what non-player characters are dead and what non-player characters are alive. in case, for when the player characters ask next week, right? And you're like, how many of the cattle are still alive, right? I know the West Wing is completely crumbled, but what's salvageable in the East Wing? And you realize, I'm not just a world maker, I'm a world breaker, right? This is all in my hands. And when you have made and broken worlds, your confidence is incredibly high, right? And I can't tell you how many poor, sad sack parents have their kids on, therapy couches because their kids have low self-esteem, right? And they're paying for months or years, but because, therapists generally can't give you the answer, they have to wait until you find it yourself, right? Because they can't project their own values on you. It'll take months or years, and some of those kids, some of those adults will never make it to the confidence that simply being an engaged dungeon master will already provide you. It's incredible. The value is so high. It's shocking. It is absolutely shocking, right? Here's the last one, okay? I am an incredible, because of Dungeons & Dragons, I'm aware of every celebrity who's ever, played Dungeons & Dragons. Ann Wall, Vin Diesel, Robin Williams, Stephen Colbert, right? Knock them off one at a time. There's lots of them. Dan Harmon, the guy who's lined up with Rick and Morty. There's a ton of them, right? And what really haunts me is Robin Williams. So I was a big fan. I saw every movie Robin Williams was ever in. Saw every television show Robin Williams was ever in, right? And so the end of Robin Williams' life was not great. It didn't end well, right? And it haunts me. It haunts me. Robin Williams made a decision at the end of his life that was shocking to everybody in his life. And he was no longer engaged, and he really he made a decision that just haunts me, right? So I was thinking about that, and I was like, and there are times, I think all of us, we all reach these low points where we're like, I don't have this thing I want, or this collection of things I want, and I'm not happy, right? And Robin Williams reached that point, right? And and he made a decision, and I realized, because of Dungeons & Dragons, that decision is impossible for me. I could never make it, right? And I had to struggle with this. I was like, how did this person who was all joy and all happiness on the outside end up, in the reality, having a sucking void in the bottom of him that made him make an incredibly dark decision, right? And I had to wrestle with that, because I was such a fan of his work, and I was so intimate with his work, right? And with him as a person, right? I'd spent more time with Robin Williams than I had spent with many of my friends, right? Like hundreds of hours, right? And I realized, I can't do that, right? I could never do what he did. And the reason why is engagement, life engagement, right? I am engaged in my world to be connected to the people I know, right? But if there's ever a point where that's not enough, right? There's 6 different worlds inside me that have to be built, right? That I am still building in my heart and in my mind, and literally on paper, right? I have 3. I have a finished tabletop role-playing game, which you can find on itch.io, and you can find on called Freight Train Onyx, and you can find it on also on RPG, Drive-Thru RPG. And I have 3 unfinished projects, right? And those worlds, they don't grow without me. I'm needed here, not just by real people. I'm needed here by figurative people as well, right? And I realized I could never depart this world with those worlds unfinished, right? The fail state on Dungeons & Dragons is so high, it's shocking. And I just don't think a lot of people recognize that. And also, I'm frustrated with the community, with a large portion of the community who just, pish paw Dungeons & Dragons. Who cares about it? Guess what? If you're a tabletop role-playing enthusiast, you have to care about Dungeons & Dragons, because it matters. Its fail state is so high, it is more valuable than the success state on the vast majority of video games, which are Dungeons & Dragons' primary competitors today. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Do you agree that the true value of that one of the incredible values of Dungeons & Dragons is not just its success state and successful games that are memorable to dungeon masters and players, but also the fail state, which is where a dungeon master who has failed to deliver the campaign they want still comes out with intensified literacy, intensified socialization, confidence, and life engagement, which frankly I don't think even the best therapists have even a chance of delivering. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.